Welcome to Between the Covers, the show for readers and writers and lovers of books. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a publisher at Red Penguin Books, where we publish books of all types and genres. So whether you have a manuscript all ready to go, a book still stuck in your head, or maybe even 500 sheets of loose leaf shoved in a drawer. And yes, probably once a month, I do receive a packet of loose leaf. Please visit us at redpenguinbooks.com and unleash your inner author. I am so delighted to have as a guest today author William John Rostron. Bill Rostron is the author of the Band in the Wind trilogy and just released The Other Side of the Wind. The Other Side of the Wind is not part of the trilogy, but if you've read it before, you're going to love it. And our author writes, in 1968, she went in search of America. America didn't want to be found. After personal disaster ends all her hopes and dreams in New York, Maria Romano sets out alone in search of a new life. Her quest for meaning takes her through numerous adventures and misadventures that create a lifetime of both beautiful and haunting memories. It is a journey that takes her from the blues clubs and political turmoil of 1968 Chicago to the music scene of San Francisco and the madness of Las Vegas. Now, in her later years, she must reconcile what it all meant in order to move on. Her past has finally caught up with her with a vengeance. By the best-selling author of the Band in the Wind trilogy, which includes Band in the Wind, Sound of Redemption, and Brotherhood of Forever. Written as a standalone novel, The Other Side of the Wind may be read enjoyably either before or after that series of novels. Please welcome author William John Rostron. So thrilled to have you here.
Thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. And I love that this is, same character as the trilogy, but not necessarily dependent. Tell me a little how you decided to write this book.
Well, it was interesting because I wrote the trilogy, which actually the first two books I had been thinking about my entire life writing. And I like to think of my genre as biographical fiction because I base things on things I've seen, done, and know of. And then I make a fictional outcome that could have been my life, I guess, and so on. So the first two books were very successful. I thought, that's it. There's no more to say in that story. Not that I'm done writing, but there's no more to say there. And then my wife says to me, she says, you could do. And there's a character in the first two books called DJ Spinelli, who's one of the few characters who lives through most of the books. And he is a friend of the main character who in the first two books something happens to. So the third book was his quest to find out what happened. At this point, I was looking for some kind of challenge. So most of that third book is written in the second person. He's talking to Johnny, who's now gone. At the beginning, he's gone a month. By the end of the book, he's gone 30 years. And he's still talking to them and saying, you left me, but I'm going to find you, and so on. And so that's the story happened. Well, I finished. I said, now I'm definitely done. Well, for those who, and again, this is two ways I have to tell the story. For people who have read the trilogy and people who haven't. In the trilogy, the main character, Johnny Sip, has to run away from where he lives, and which is one of the main themes of the book. And in doing so, he leaves behind the girl he loves, Maria Romano. When I was in the middle of the second book, I was recounting what happened to all the characters that got left behind by this Johnny, because Johnny told the story in the first two books. So I said, I want to tell that story. And it worked out very well. I had about 30 pages about Maria Romano, the person that he left. Editor said, no, this book is moving much faster and in a different direction. You don't have time to do 30 pages about what happened to her. Cut out 25 of the pages and moved on. Well, when I'm done with the third book, my wife goes, I go, well, now I'm really done. She goes, why don't you tell the story of Maria? Because you know very little about her except that she got left behind. So I sat down and I started writing it. And then it it really came to pass because as you know, my wife and I have traveled the country. We've been to every state in our motorhome, and we've been to places. We go to very unusual places besides the common places. Well, I said, well, if Maria heads out in this country, she can run into all kinds of things. And I have that information right in my head about it. So I tied it into the other books in that she is a character. And at the beginning, it's sort of the story that intertwines with the first three books. And in the end, it sort of intertwines, but really it's the story of what she did. And she heads out first tentatively to be looking for Johnny. She thinks, oh, he loves music so much, he'll go to Chicago for the blues scene. So she goes there, but she becomes very involved and in Chicago, besides the blues scene, she's there with the Democratic riots and she's involved in politics. Then with a group of friends, they take off across the country and then I had worked in all the places that I had been, like, we had been to a sunflower field that was hundreds of acres large of sunflowers that was 7 feet tall. I worked that into the story. We went to Little Bighorn. I worked that into the story because it's not just her. She's traveling with a group of people, and one of them is half Lakota Sioux. So when they start going to all these places where there were conflicts between, he has conflicts with one of the other characters who's from Minnesota and is Nordic descent, friendly, but they have discussions about what happened. But that's just like the first parts, and there's 9 parts. But that's just to give you an idea. And that's how it started. My wife said, well, you could do the story of Maria Romano. The fun part is, she said, I don't think you can write from a woman's point of view.
Ooh, there's a challenge.
Because she's telling the story.
Right.
In my first 3 books, it would alternate a chapter first person and then third person. And then in the last book, it was second person and third person.
Ooh.
And I wrote this book 100% in first person from Maria's point of view.
And did your wife think you nailed it?
You read the first 100 pages. I think you did it. I didn't think you could, but I think you did it.
After all these years, how many years are you married, Bill?
50 years last April.
Congratulations. Wow.
Yeah.
So after 50 years, you're still surprising her.
Yes, I am.
That's what I'm hearing. After 50 years, not only you're still surprising her, you're still impressing her. And that's not easy after 50 years, I'm sure.
Oh, people go to us, how do you, like, because some of the times we went cross country, we'd drive for 12 hours straight. In fact, our best record was we drove from Pittsburgh to Denver in one day.
Oh my, I see that map behind you.
Right.
That's quite the map behind you. Wow.
Yes. And people said, well, how do you do it without driving each other crazy? We put on a book, we put on music, we look at scenery, we talk a little. And
although that dead end in the middle of is that South Dakota with a dead end?
That's Mount Rushmore.
Okay.
What we actually
turned around and came back.
What we actually did was we said, what do we want? Well, what do we want to see?
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to see every Major League Baseball park.
Have you seen every Major League Baseball?
Every single one, yes. We did that by 2011. But it was very hard to schedule because they had to be in the city and we had to be passing through the city. Right. That's how we ended up going from Pittsburgh to Denver. And
gotcha. Oh, to see a game.
They were leaving town and wouldn't be back while we were still. So
is she the baseball fan you are, or is this a you thing?
Yes, she is.
Oh, well, thank goodness for that.
The only conflict is that we both root for the Yankees and Mets. When they play each other, I favor the Yankees, she favors the Mets, and it's a little ugly.
All right, so she's got better taste than you. What can I say?
Oh, but our kids gave us for our 50th anniversary, they rented a luxury box at City Field. And we had
Oh,
17 family and friends in, the food and the drinks and the
if
big
they could
stuff.
get it, could have gotten that for a Subway Series game. That would have been
Yeah.
also probably cost prohibitive.
Well, 7 years ago, they did it for my 65th
Oh,
birthday. They
okay.
did it at Yankee Stadium.
Oh, nice. Okay, so they
Yes.
flip flop. I get that.
Yes.
I
The only
get
thing is my grandkids think that's what it's like when you go to every ball game. They're going to be really surprised when they go to.
No, that's not what it's really like when you go to a
That's not what it's really like.
Oh my gosh. So I love that it was your wife's decision to write this book. And
Yes.
you rose to the occasion. You
Yes. She even for a short period of time thought she might write it with me, but she's got too many things going on too. So
and we didn't want to break up this 50-year marriage by trying
right. That would have done it.
all those trips cross country didn't do it. Writing a book.
No, but writing the book would have.
I could totally see that. I love that. I always hear from novelists that there was a character that, sometimes it's in the course of the novel that you thought it was going to be this bit player. And next thing you know, they got their whole scene, they had a whole thing. Your bit player got their own book.
Right. Because, I mean, in reality, my wife and I have known each other since we were 14 years old. So we knew each other 8 years before we got married for 50 years.
Wow.
So a lot of the scenes, actually the first like 10 pages of the book actually happened to the two of us. But my first book, Band in the Wind, I have it here somewhere. Well, I have that. Anyway, Band in the Wind was the first half of the book was written almost as a biography. Of course, I made whatever wasn't really interesting and I took some of the characters and they were combinations of people I knew, but it was a true story up until a certain point.
Right.
Well, it is the story. The first book is the story of a young man, and all my books take place in Southeast Queens, of a young man who wants to get out of this crime and violence and everything. And he wants to get out of it because he's met Maria. And so he's going to do it. He's either going to do it with sports or college, but he really wants to do it with music. So he takes some chances, and one of those chances backfires on him. And in reality, those things happened. It's funny. The first interview when I did it like 3 years ago, I tried not to say it. But in the book, the band ends up in trouble, and 4 of the 5 members get killed, and the main character Johnny has to run away because he knows he's next. That actually happened. Not that they got killed, but I was in a band, and the place we were at got raided, and I was off the side of the stage. And because I was on the side of the stage, 4 policemen came in to raid because we were underage.
Oh.
And because we were underage, we were in a competition for a job that was a record contract and working 3 times a week forever. So it was financially, we were set for life. Well, at least from our point of view. And when the other band lost, they went and called the police because they overheard someone say we were underage. The police came in. There were 4 police and 5 in the band. They all grabbed someone. I turned around and go, "You didn't grab me." Now, I was shaving from when I was 12 years old, so I looked much older. I went and sat at the bar with a drink, and I made believe, I never saw the 4 members of the band again. That's the true part of the story.
Oh my gosh.
I never saw them because a week later, I was feeling really guilty that they were all in trouble because the place we were playing was owned by the mob.
Oh.
So I was feeling really guilty about this happening. And I was on a date with Maria, who is my wife, Marilyn. And I saw in a very distant, we were walking in a park, they were like 3 people beating up a kid. And I said, he's on the floor and they're just kicking. I got to stop them, which was a stupid thing to do. But
Noble, but stupid.
40 years of self-analyzation, I was feeling guilty for what happened the week before.
Right,
I
right.
run in there. P.S. I get them out, but I end up in the hospital for like 2 or 3 weeks. Well, by the time I come out, I'm calling the guys in the band and the parents are going, they don't want to talk to you. They can't talk to you because they were protecting me because they never found out I was in the band.
Gotcha.
So I let it go. I said, okay, I'll keep my distance. Next thing I know, they're all gone. The one who was my closest friend, who in the book is called the character Geo, he literally moved to Florida.
Oh my God.
Ran away.
Right, right, right.
Okay. 2 others, I have no idea what happened. In fact, all of them, I never knew what happened. So I said for like 30 years, I kept imagining, well, what happened to the 4? I can't find them anywhere. I mean, I moved away, went to college, and I kept saying, what happened to them? That's where the book came from. I made up an imaginary story of what happened to the 4 of them.
I love that. And you know what I love? So often I'm speaking to people who, one of 2 things. One is that they say, I don't know what to write about. And, you know, the old adage is write what you know. You are like a classic case of write what you know. And you know it so well. And it shows on every single page of the book that you know what you're talking about, because you lived it. You're writing from what you know. But the other thing I'm hearing when you're talking, I have people who will come to me and they kind of like want to write their story, but they're kind of torn with whether they want to put it in the form of a memoir. And I've spoken abstractly about fictionalizing their story.
Which is what I did.
You start with your story, and now you get to decide how it turns out.
Biographical fiction.
Exactly. I should put your books here as like when people come to me and they say, how do I do this? Read these books, and then here's his number. Call him up.
I will tell you that I wrote these books, and as I started, I said, well, I started with the concept of what happened to the 4 of them.
Right.
And I actually wrote the middle of the book, the part where they get raided and everything like that. And they said, okay, now I got to have a beginning and I got to have an ending.
Right.
And I mean, I'm talking 20 years. In my head, it's playing. And then I got very sick in 2011, and I was recuperating, and they told me to do a lot of walking. So while I was walking, I was listening in iPods, I was listening to music, and I love 60s classic British Invasion garage band stuff because that's how old I am. I'm that old. And every time I heard a song, I'd say, gee, you know, that song makes me think of a plot thing that could happen. And I'd come back from walking and I'd write 2 or 3 pages. Mm-hmm. And I'd entitle it with the song
right
that happened. Well, by the time I finished, a year later, I had close to 400 songs and 400 of these little tidbits. And it was almost like putting pieces of puzzles together. I put them in an order and they made a great story. But I had written them in 3-page, put them all together. My book was 900 words. I said, no, I don't want to read a 900-page book. So my daughter did some cutting. I did some cutting. And then, as you know, they became 2 books. And I cut out 60,000 words. And it ended up being two very reasonably sized books. But each part of the book, like every 3 or 4 pages, is a title, because it is the main character, Johnny Sipp, is telling, it's his diary. Mm. And so he's telling it, he's entitled every chapter with the song title. And I mean, I'm actually talking about the first book instead of the last book, but it does lead to it. The book starts that this journal where he's written all these little quips about what happened in 23 years of his life is found on a beach in Key West,
Mhm.
laying there on the shore. And the person who finds it knows him. And he knows that the last thing makes it sound like he's in the water.
Mhm.
And then it flashes back to each one of his diary. And he won't call it a diary. He has an argument with a friend. I can't call it a diary. That's for little girls. So I call it a journal. And each one of his journal entries is 3 pages long, has the title of a song, and the title of the song has to do with what part of his journey he's at. That was like a 7-year quest to put these all in order. When I did the third book, his friend knows that he's done this, because the third book, they start to find tapes that the band made. And because the drummer in the group had been given like cases of tapes by an uncle that he got somewhere free, they tape everything. And they never remember to turn it off before or after they finish playing a song. So their conversations of what this band that is now all gone are in the tapes. And the friend who's looking for him is listening to the tapes. And it's bringing you back to the first 2 books and the first 2 characters and the first 5 characters. And it brings you back to them. Well, in the 4th book, which again, I have to emphasize, and this is very important for anyone who's watching this who is a writer. I went to a workshop once and they said, there's good and bad about writing a trilogy. The good is that, boy, if they like your first book, they're going to read your second and third. The bad is they could love your first book and still not read your second and third. So therefore, you've read these 2 books that are going to get nowhere near the sales that the first book gets. And I've spoken to you recently that I've had a really good campaign of Facebook ads, and I found my niche of people who really, really love my books. And the thing is that even with these people, and my sales of the first book have gone through the roof. And though I'm only putting an ad for the first book, I'm getting ads for the second. I'm getting a lot of sales of second and third. However, I can tell you for every 10 I sell of the first one, I sell 5 of the second one and 3 of the third one.
Yep.
Now, I will tell you, my friend who is a magazine editor for 40 years and his life has been writing. In fact, he's the basis of the character of the third book, because he taught me write. When we were in high school and college together, we'd talk about writing. He says, your third book, he goes, your first and second are great. He goes, but your third is the best one. I go, yeah, but nobody's getting to it because they have to read the first and second to get to it. And that's what made me do the 4th one.
Okay.
I said, I want to, this could be the best of them all. I said, but if you have to read 3 books to get to it, yeah, a lot of people will, but a lot of people won't.
They don't have to. They absolutely don't have to read.
So and that was like the hardest task of me writing. The third book was to write it in second person. And the hardest part of the 4th book was the female perspective, but it was also writing a book that people who read the first 3 could enjoy and people who hadn't read any of them could enjoy. That was the hardest part.
Not easy. Well, I was about to ask you, who should we be buying this book for? So now we know that it could be someone who read your trilogy or someone who didn't read your trilogy. But aside from that, describe who I should be thinking about. If I were in a bookstore shopping for my gift list, who should I be thinking about for this book?
I will honestly tell you that because Facebook gives me statistics, I have sold books on 5 continents and 48 states. I try to look at the demographics, and all of my books, though I have had people write great reviews, they're 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, they tend to be people who there are people who like it just for the plot. All 4 of the books. There are people who like it just for the plot. However, there are people who do the nostalgia. So it's, people over 50 that they don't just enjoy the book. It's their life, and they're talking about it. They'll put in their comments on Facebook. Oh yes, and that reminds me of when I did this and so on. And we're talking about 1,300 people have shared it, and they talk about it. It's like we're a little club of people. My wife believes, and I know I'm going to say this and it could hurt me, but my wife believes this is more of a woman's book.
Okay.
I once did a book club with 15 women and they all enjoyed it. But one woman turned around and says, but I kept getting the feeling I was reading a man's book. Now, the other 14 said, what? Because it is the story of Johnny and Maria to start with. It's the story of Johnny and the band. It's a story of other people that age. They just felt it might have skewed a little toward, and a lot of women said, no, because that just, I remember all that happening and so on. My wife said this book really does, a lot of women would like it.
Okay.
That
doesn't necessarily like knock out half of the population, but
right.
It fine tunes, which is good.
Right, because though my wife said, oh, you did do it in a woman's style, and she is telling the story, it really is an adventure. I mean, like I said, when she's down in the blues clubs and she's talking to the Mississippi blues black players who've come up from Mississippi, and she's enjoying the music. And of course, it's very disconnected because here she is, a 19-year-old white girl, and she's speaking to, these 70, 80-year-old black blues players, but she's getting along with them. It's an adventure. And I will say that it also is, when she goes to Chicago, and again, I was using my experiences in all the ballparks. She gets a job working in Wrigley Field. And Wrigley Field, for those who've never been there, their urinals are 100 years old. So what they have is a 20-foot long basin. And I never forgot that when I went there. So I put that in, that it was off season. She goes, thank God it was off season. But we were cleaning these things. But she makes friends with a group of two brothers from Minnesota, a character who's biracial. He's Lakota Indian and black, and another girl who's from Chicago. And this group of 5 goes to the clubs. And because they all work at Wrigley Field, they call themselves the Wrigley Rockers, because they go to music places all over the place, and that's their life. Well, this group of 5 has a lot of interaction, and they end up doing a lot of things in Chicago. Then they end up going to the Midwest, and they end up going to Yellowstone, and then to San Francisco, and then to Seattle. And it's 1968. So again, I'm drawing on what was going on in 1968. Now, I remember exactly, but most people won't. But a lot of things happened in 1968 in the places where they were. And they find themselves intertwined with history.
Well, that's another group then. So it's people who identify with the era. It's people who love to travel, because you've got slices of America. It's people who love history, whether or not they were alive in those days, or just really want to be able to look back in a way that you're reading about people and not just out of a history book.
Well, especially in the third book, Brotherhood of Forever, I really should say the titles every now and then, Band of the Wind and Sound of Redemption, the first 2. And the Brotherhood of Forever, the back of that book says it's seen through the eyes of a group of about 10 people who experienced 50 years of history. So the plot is intertwining, but it's happening through Woodstock, through Vietnam, through the moon landing, through 9/11. These same 10 characters are interacting, and they're interacting without reading the book. It may not, they're interacting, but they're all reacting to the tapes they hear. Every time they hear the tape, it separately, each of them, it does something to them. One woman, it gives her the nerve to stand up to her ex-boyfriend. To one person, it gives him the nerve to make himself stronger, and he eventually builds himself up and becomes a policeman. In the first book, there's a character called Bracco who's physically abused, and he's a member of the band, and the band knows it, and they know he's abused all the time. And he comes to the final time they play bleeding from his face because his father has beaten him, but he wasn't missing this, because if they're successful, he's leaving his father when he turns 18. Well, he does everything right in life. He's in the middle of, and again, the first two books are in the backdrop of racial tension in Southeast Queens. And so it's a lot of interaction and fighting. But Bracco, in one instance, not only saves a white kid, but then saves the black kid when white kids come for revenge. He stands up to both of them. The character that he saves doesn't know anything except this character's name is Bracco, and he never sees him again. But 2 years later, he's grown up big, and he says, he's ruled by the one thing as, what would Bracco do? And so when he becomes a policeman and he has a chance to avoid a gang that's beating up a lot of people, he goes, no, what would Bracco do? But see, now he eventually hears the tape of Bracco speaking, and he goes, what would Bracco do?
Wow.
So,
well, you're an incredible commercial for all of your books. I know trying to push your newest book here, but wow, we're pushing all the books here.
Yes, it is. And
hard not to, I get that.
and again, I purposely made this so that if people didn't want to read the other three, they could just go right. This could come out and people not even know I had 3 other books.
But we hope that they do. We hope that they.
Yes. Well, I will say though, when I wrote the first book, and again, I get a lot of feedback from Facebook where I put the ads. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people talk to me like I'm their buddy, because I answer them when they say, I really like the book. I go, oh, thank you. And, I go right on Facebook and I go, oh, thank you. And they made a point because somebody says, oh, do I have to read all 3? No, I specifically wrote the first book. First book ends. If you never pick up the second, you don't, it isn't like to be continued. Gotcha. No, the first book ends and it's done. And if that's all you read, that's all you read. Because in fact, I didn't even mention for a long time that a second book was coming, because I didn't want people to say, oh, it's going to stop in the middle of the story. It doesn't stop in the middle of the story. It ends its story.
Gotcha.
Then you get to the second book. The story ends. There didn't have to be any other book written. Mm-hmm. So you could read the first and the second and not read the third. And then you could read the third. The only thing I would say is you can't start at the second or start at the third. But the idea was that you could pick up just the first.
Gotcha.
And that followed through to this one that I said, it's got to be that it was proving too much to be true, that some people weren't getting to the third.
Right.
And my close friends who've read it said, oh, third is our favorite, and it's actually the longest of them all. I mean, it's in pages, it is the longest, but it's my one friend, again, who's an editor of a magazine, said, you just mastered the art of coincidences, how these people all intertwined through 50 years. Some of them didn't know each other, run into each other.
Awesome. Well,
which will be a little joke for people who have read the 3 books. I will make little references to characters who don't appear in this book, but were in the other books. But it isn't a reference where they meet them or anything. I'll just go, oh yeah, and I saw a sign that said so-and-so. Well, if you read the other book, that sign was.
Right. Fantastic. Well, let's hope that some of our viewers read this 4th book. Which
yes.
Can be a standalone, but if you really, really like it, you're not at the end, because there's more.
You can go back and start over.
There's more Bill Rostron to read, but find the other side of the wind. It's available every place, but also if you want to see all of the books, WilliamJohnRostron.com. And
I don't know if this one's even on the website yet.
Well, we better make sure it is then for all these people.
In fact, you're showing pictures I
There
have the
you go.
book. Now, how do I have the book? Well, I just pasted a picture of one of my other books.
Oh, that's a secret we won't tell people.
Because it only came out 12 hours ago, as
Exactly.
you
So we don't
know.
actually have a book yet. So there we
Right.
go.
I mean, this is current. We're
It's very
really current here.
well, maybe some of our viewers will get it even before you get it.
And
Let's hope
let's
so.
not forget to mention the other book, Flamingo Under the Carousel.
Yes. Well, that's why I said they should go to the website because they can
Right.
see the books there.
Because and that I actually owe you for. When I
Glad to
finish
keep you writing.
what?
Glad to keep you writing.
When I finish the first three books, I go, what am I gonna do? And then there was one of the Red Penguin collection. I
Yep.
said,
That's
I've never written a short. I've written short stories. In fact, I got an award from Nelson DeMille in 1999, but that's the last time I wrote a short story. I said, let me write one. And I wrote it and it got put in. I go, hey, I like this. Well, I now have written 37 short stories. And 5 of them got Writers Digest awards this year. And I put the first 25 in the short story book, which is called The Flamingo Under the Carousel. And there's an explanation for that title,
absolutely.
which I give right away because I can't stand when authors make an unusual title and they don't tell you ever. So first thing I did was say, here's why it's called Flamingo Under a Carousel. But to be honest, as a writer, I have found that people are not as interested in short stories as they are in novels. Maybe there are people, but I don't know as many. But the people who like it say, oh, I could pick it up and read one story and that's it. And
yes, people who like short stories don't want to read novels. They have very short attention spans.
right. And it's funny because there's a place in the book where I say they were all written at separate times. So you can go to the fifth one, go over to the first one. My sister is reading and she goes, I literally did that just because you said to do it. And she said, and then I forgot which ones I read and which ones I didn't
So
read.
better to go in order.
Right. So, maybe. But the other thing about the short story book that I'm very proud of, though, I don't know if it's catching on or anything, but every single story, I wrote a page introduction of, because all my stories, even my short stories, are biographical fiction. And I wrote, well, what made this story happen? And I go through some of them, it's one paragraph, some of it's 2 or 3 paragraphs, but it says, well, this is where this story came from. I mean, the prompt might have been Red Penguins.
Right.
But
it came
how I handle it goes, and sometimes I'd say, I got nothing. And then in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and I go, oh yeah, when that happened, I could tell this story. Like, for example, the one that just came out with Red Penguin, I'll give you a plug. The one that came out with for Red Penguin, the London book. Now, I've never been to London. My wife and I have had reservations to go to London 4 different times, and every time something happened, either physically to us or to a family member or something, and we have never gotten there, which is interesting because I am English and I'm half English and half Italian. So we went to Italy and we saw all of Italy and I saw my heritage there. And I said, yeah, now we'll go to England. We'll see that. We just never got there. So when the story for London came up, I said, well, I've never been to London. I can't write anything. And the next day I thought of the story that's in the book about, because I may never have gone to London, but I did run 6 marathons. So I tied the story into the fact that I don't know how many people know it, but marathons are 26.2 miles. And the reason they are 0.62 miles, because the Queen of England wanted her grandchildren to see the start of the race. So they moved it back 2/10 of a mile to Windsor Castle. So that's where I got the idea for that story.
There we go.
And then
always, like I said before, people wonder, I don't know what to write about. And you're showing me there's always something to write about.
And again, I don't even know if it'll be in the Paris one. But for the Paris one, I said, I've never been to Paris and I've never really wanted to go to Paris. I'm probably offending people. I said, but let me get to England first. But anyway, I said, what can I write about in Paris? Well, in Paris is where Jim Morrison is buried.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And I wrote a fictional story about his last night in Paris because he died in a Paris hotel. And he is the most popular, he's the most popular attraction in Pierre Lachaise Cemetery. And Oscar Wilde is buried there, and Moliere. And so, but everybody goes to see Jim Morrison. So I wrote the story about his last night in Paris before. Now, I don't even know if it'll be in the Paris, but that's all I knew about Paris.
And then something to write about.
Right. And then in Rome I did go to.
Okay.
And,
so a true life story there.
This is a true life story. This actually is. In Rome, our last night of 17 days there, the tour guide lets us go out on our own, and we walk into Rome and we get lost. We can't find our way back to the hotel. So we're walking like 3 blocks, and me being the male, my wife's going, why don't we ask someone? And I go, no, I know the way. Eventually we start asking people, but everybody we ask goes, no capisce, which, as Italian as I don't understand what you're saying because I only speak Italian. So we do this for a good 45 minutes. And finally, we're exhausted. We sit on a bench. Now, can't tell with the glasses and the hat, but that's some medical things. But I'm very Italian looking. And my wife is full-blooded Italian. So we're sitting on the bench, and this young couple comes up and go, excuse me, do you speak English? We're from America. And we're lost, and we're hoping you can tell us. I go, well, the good news is I speak English. The bad news is I'm lost too. But before I said that to them, when they said it, the first thing I said was, no capisce. And as they started to walk away, I said, no, let me tell you.
4 Americans lost in Rome. That'll be coming out soon, folks. I love that. Well, Bill, always a pleasure.
Anyway.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Let me remind our viewers where they can find not just your newest release, The Other Side of the Wind, but all of your books, because whether you like novels, a trilogy, or short stories, there is something that you're going to enjoy because you're definitely going to enjoy meeting and reading Bill Rostron. So always a pleasure. These books and hopefully a lot more. And
thank you.
And for you and for all of our viewers, I'll say happy travels, because with a map like that, I'm sure there's a trip coming up somewhere. I just hope you keep
January 14th, Key West, but yeah.
Well, hopefully you'll keep on writing there.
Yes.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.